The air shimmered with the golden haze of a barren night sunset. A calm blanket over the human colony nestled at the edge of the Ebonvale woods. Emma, an 8-year-old with tousled brown hair and a stubborn sense of curiosity, sat cross-legged in the dirt, drawing lazy patterns with a stick. Around her, the hum of daily life filled the settlement. The metallic clatter of tools, the murmur of conversations, and the occasional distant laughter. Her mother's voice floated out from their modest dwelling, calling her for dinner, but Emma wasn't ready to leave her masterpiece, a stick figure surrounded by stars. Her focus was broken by a subtle vibration beneath her fingers. It came again, stronger this time, like the pulse of a giant heartbeat. Emma's eyes darted toward the forest. Shadows stretched unnaturally long as the sun dipped lower, and the trees seemed to sway with a rhythm all their own. A chill prickled at her skin despite the warmth of the evening. "Emma, come inside now," her mother called again, urgency threading her words. Emma hesitated, her stick falling to the ground. Something in the woods shifted, a soundless ripple, like the forest was holding its breath. Then they emerged. The creatures moved like specters, their massive forms cloaked in the dim light. 10 feet tall, with sleek bodies that shimmered between fur and metal, they resembled wolves sculpted from nightmares. Their eyes glowed an eerie blue, reflecting a predatory intelligence. Emma froze as they stepped into the clearing, each movement deliberate, silent. The colony erupted into chaos. Shouts rang out. People scattered, diving for cover. The alien wolves, Fangoraptors as the colonists had named them, moved with terrifying precision. One leapt over a supply cart, its claws shearing through reinforced steel as though it were paper. Another lunged toward a fleeing man, pinning him to the ground before releasing him, uninterested. They weren't here to kill indiscriminately. They were searching. Emma's father grabbed her arm, yanking her toward their home. "Stay with your mother," he said, his voice tight. "Don't let go of her, no matter what." "Dad, what's happening?" Emma whispered, her voice trembling. His answer was drowned out by a deafening howl that shook the air. The pack leader stepped forward, larger than the rest, its eyes burning like twin moons. It tilted its head, sniffing the air. Then its gaze locked onto Emma. Time slowed. Her father shoved her behind him, his body tense, ready to shield her. The wolf didn't attack. Instead, it took a single step forward, its claws sinking into the dirt. "Run!" her father roared. Emma's legs moved before her mind caught up. She sprinted toward the house, her mother's outstretched arms beckoning her. But the wolves were faster. One vaulted over the fence, landing between her and the door. It growled low, a rumble that seemed to vibrate through her bones. "Please," her mother begged, stepping in front of Emma. The wolf regarded her with something almost like curiosity before brushing her aside with a flick of its massive paw. Emma screamed as her mother crumpled to the ground, unconscious but alive. The leader approached, towering over her. Emma's breath hitched as it lowered its head, sniffing her face. For a moment, it seemed to hesitate, as if weighing some unseen decision. Then, with a sudden motion, it nudged her with its snout, sending her stumbling forward. Strong jaws closed around the back of her shirt, lifting her off the ground as though she weighed nothing. Emma flailed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Help! Please, someone!" But the colony was in ruins. Fires crackled, casting jagged shadows across the wreckage. The wolves had what they wanted, and as the pack fell into formation, they retreated toward the forest, Emma dangling helplessly in the leader's grip. The transition from the open clearing to the forest was like stepping into another world. The dense canopy swallowed the light, plunging them into an eerie twilight. The air was thick, humid, and alive with strange sounds, clicks, hisses, and distant roars. The wolves moved silently, their glowing eyes the only markers of their presence. Emma's mind raced, alternating between terror and confusion. Why hadn't they killed her? Why take her at all? She tried to twist around, to see where they were taking her, but the wolf's grip was unyielding. Hours seemed to pass as they ventured deeper into the Ebonvale woods. The forest grew stranger. The trees gnarled and covered in a bioluminescent moss that pulsed faintly. Emma's fear began to dull, replaced by an odd numbness. Exhaustion tugged at her eyelids, but she forced herself to stay awake. At last, the wolves stopped. They had reached a clearing dominated by a massive structure, a hybrid of natural and artificial design. It rose like a jagged crown, its spires carved from obsidian rock and fused with alien metal. Strange symbols glowed faintly along its surface, shifting and twisting as though alive. The leader released Emma, dropping her unceremoniously onto the ground. She scrambled back, her heart pounding as the pack encircled her. Their eyes gleamed in the dim light, watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. One of the smaller wolves stepped forward. Unlike the others, its body was less mechanical, its movements more fluid. It crouched low, studying her. Then, to Emma's astonishment, it spoke. Human, it said, the word guttural and strange, as though it had never been meant for such a voice. You are the key. Emma's breath hitched. Key? Key to what? The wolf tilted its head but didn't answer. Instead, it stepped aside, revealing the pack leader, who stood motionless before the towering structure. The symbols along the spires began to glow brighter, reacting to their presence, or perhaps to Emma herself. The leader turned to her, its voice resonating in her mind rather than her ears. You will understand soon. Before Emma could speak, the ground beneath her feet began to vibrate. The structure emitted a deep, resonant hum, and the air seemed to shimmer. Emma's heart raced as she glanced around, searching for an escape. But the wolves closed ranks, their glowing eyes unblinking. She was trapped, and whatever was about to happen, she was at the center of it. The clearing was silent, save for the faint hum emanating from the towering structure. Emma's pulse thundered in her ears as the Fangoraptors watched her with an intensity that seemed to pierce through her. Their glowing eyes, alien and unrelenting, revealed no hint of emotion, only purpose. Her legs trembled as she stood, her mind racing with questions. The wolf that had spoken, the smaller, less mechanical one, lingered close. It was different from the others. Its eyes didn't burn as brightly, and its movements, though deliberate, lacked the precise, machine-like efficiency of the pack. It studied her with a curiosity that felt almost human. What do you want from me? Emma demanded, her voice wavering but loud enough to echo faintly off the obsidian walls. Her fear was momentarily eclipsed by frustration, her small fists clenching at her sides. I'm not a key. I'm just a kid. The leader of the pack, the largest of them all, tilted its massive head at her outburst. Its hulking frame moved forward with a grace that belied its size, the claws on its cybernetic limbs leaving faint scorch marks on the ground. Emma instinctively stepped back, but the glowing patterns along the structure behind her seemed to shift in response to her proximity, their light flaring briefly before dimming. The smaller wolf, the one that had spoken before, let out a low growl, not a threatening sound, but one that carried the weight of communication. Calyx, it said, the word rasping from its throat. The leader, Calyx, she now knew, acknowledged the smaller wolf with a flick of its ear. Its voice emerged, a deep, resonant sound that Emma felt more than heard. She does not yet understand. Emma froze. The words didn't reach her ears. They reverberated in her mind, clear and cold. Her confusion deepened, and she stared at the massive creature in disbelief. Why am I here? She asked again, her voice softer this time. Calyx didn't answer immediately. Instead, it turned its head toward the pack. A low rumble passed through them, a chorus of sounds that seemed to carry meaning only they could decipher. One by one, the wolves stepped back, their glowing eyes fixed on Emma as they formed a loose circle around the clearing. The smaller wolf stepped closer, lowering itself to her level. Its eyes, though alien, lacked the cold detachment of Calyx's. When it spoke, its voice was less harsh, though still raw and uneven. You are human, it began, pausing as though struggling to find the right words. Your kind built machines. destroyed much. Emma's heart sank. She knew what it was talking about, the stories her parents told her about the early colonists on Varan 9. The humans who came before her family had waged war on the planet's original inhabitants, stripping the land and driving many native species to extinction. But that was a long time ago. Her colony had been trying to make peace, to rebuild trust with the planet's life forms. I didn't destroy anything, Emma said quietly. The wolf tilted its head, as though weighing her words. Not you, it agreed, but you are still human. Calyx growled, silencing the smaller wolf. It took a step closer, and Emma braced herself. The light from the structure's glowing symbols illuminated the edges of its massive form, casting jagged shadows. You are here, Calyx said, the words once again reverberating in her mind. Because you are different. Emma frowned, confused. Different? How? Calyx didn't answer. Instead, it gestured with a clawed paw toward the structure behind her. The light pulsing along its surface intensified, as if responding to her presence. She turned to face it, a strange sensation crawling over her skin. It wasn't just the light, it was the hum, the faint vibration in the air. It felt alive. What is this place? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Calyx's reply was as cryptic as ever. A relic of those who came before. It sleeps, waiting for its purpose to awaken. Emma looked back at the wolves, their glowing eyes a ring of silent judgment. And what does that have to do with me? The smaller wolf stepped forward again, ignoring Calyx's low growl. Your kind left marks. Here, it said, tapping its chest with a claw. In your blood. The machine knows you. Emma's breath caught. She turned back to the structure, the glowing patterns twisting and shifting like a living puzzle. The idea sounded impossible. How could a machine, an alien relic, recognize her? But then again, nothing about this situation felt real. She hesitated, reaching out toward the surface of the structure. The moment her fingers brushed against it, the hum surged. Light exploded outward in a cascading wave, illuminating the clearing with a brilliance that made her shield her eyes. The wolves howled, their voices blending into a haunting, harmonic chorus. The ground beneath her feet vibrated as the structure responded to her touch, the symbols on its surface shifting faster now, forming patterns that felt purposeful, deliberate. Emma yanked her hand back, her chest heaving. I don't understand, she shouted, her voice cracking. Calyx loomed closer, its massive form casting a shadow over her. You will, it said. In time, the pack began to stir, their movements restless. Emma could feel the tension in the air, an unspoken urgency that made her skin crawl. The smaller wolf, its name still unknown to her, lingered close, its gaze softer than the others. They will come, it murmured so quietly she almost didn't hear it. Emma frowned. Who? The wolf didn't answer, its eyes shifting toward the dark woods beyond the clearing. For the first time since the raid, Emma saw something in the Fangoraptor's behavior that unsettled her more than anything else. Fear. Calyx let out a guttural growl, and the pack instantly fell into formation, their glowing eyes fixed on the forest. Emma turned, squinting into the shadows, but saw nothing. The hum of the structure began to fade, the light dimming as if retreating back into its depths. Calyx lowered its head to her level, its gaze piercing. Stay close, human, it said, its voice as sharp as broken glass. Your survival is no longer just your own. Before Emma could process the words, the woods erupted with movement. Something was coming. The forest seemed to exhale, a deep and resonant shift that swept through the air. Emma's heart raced as a guttural sound rose in the distance. Alien and unrelenting, a sound that spoke of raw, primal hunger. The Fangoraptors bristled, their sleek forms tensing as their glowing eyes scanned the darkened trees. Whatever was approaching, it terrified them. Calyx growled low, the sound vibrating through the ground beneath Emma's feet. It wasn't anger, it was warning. He barked something sharp in their strange tongue, and the pack immediately spread out, forming a protective perimeter around the clearing. Emma stumbled backward, her gaze darting between the wolves and the shadowy depths of the forest, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. "What's happening?" she whispered, the words barely audible over the rising hum of tension. The smaller wolf, the one who had spoken to her earlier, stayed close, its head low and its ears flattened. Its voice was quieter now, more urgent. "They hunt. Always hunt." "Who?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. It didn't answer, but its gaze flicked toward the treeline. Emma followed its eyes, her heart lurching as she spotted movement. A faint glimmer of silver and black, shifting too quickly to focus on. A shriek split the air, high-pitched and unnatural. It wasn't the howl of a wolf or the cry of any creature Emma had ever heard. It was sharp and jagged, as if it could tear through flesh and bone simply by existing. The Fangoraptors reacted instantly, their formation tightening, their claws digging into the dirt. Calyx's massive form took the lead, standing like an unbreakable wall between the threat and the pack. Emma stumbled back further, her foot catching on a root. She hit the ground hard, pain shooting through her hands as she tried to break her fall. Tears welled in her eyes, but she bit her lip, forcing herself to stay quiet. Whatever was out there, it was coming closer, and she couldn't afford to make herself a target. The first of them appeared at the edge of the clearing. It moved like liquid shadow, its body rippling with an unnatural fluidity. Its shape was vaguely insect-like, with limbs that were too many and too long, ending in sharp, claw-like appendages. Its head was featureless except for a pair of glowing, red eyes that burned like embers in the dark. Behind it, more emerged, their numbers growing until the treeline seemed alive with their shifting forms. Skrells. Emma didn't know the name, but the Fangoraptors did. A deep, collective growl rose from the pack, their bodies lowering into a predatory stance. Calyx barked again, the sound sharp and commanding, and the pack surged forward as one. The clash was immediate and brutal. The Fangoraptors moved with a lethal grace, their claws and cybernetic enhancements carving through the Skrells with practiced precision. But the Skrells were relentless. For every one that fell, two more seemed to take its place, their movements erratic and unpredictable. Emma scrambled to her feet, her back pressed against the alien structure. The symbols on its surface glowed faintly, as if responding to the chaos around it. She watched in stunned horror as the battle raged, the clearing becoming a frenzy of claws, teeth, and blood. One of the Skrells broke through the line, its unervingly fluid body twisting as it lunged toward her. Emma froze, her mind screaming at her to move, but her legs refused to obey. The creature's red eyes locked onto her, and she knew she was going to die. Before it could reach her, the smaller wolf intercepted, its body slamming into the Skrell with bone-crushing force. The two tumbled to the ground, snarling and hissing as they fought. The wolf's claws raked across the Skrell's carapace, sparks flying as they met resistance. The Skrell screeched, its limbs flailing, but the wolf was faster. With a final, savage bite, it tore into the creature's throat, silencing it. The wolf turned to Emma, its chest heaving, and nudged her with its snout. "Move!" It growled, the word rough and urgent. Emma forced herself to her feet, her legs trembling. She wanted to run, to escape this nightmare, but there was nowhere to go. The clearing was a battlefield, and the forest beyond was no safer. Calyx's voice cut through the chaos, his mental command resonating like a blade. "Protect her!" The smaller wolf growled in response, positioning itself between Emma and the fight. The others surged forward, their bodies colliding with the Skrells in a violent wave. Emma watched, her chest tight with fear and helplessness. She hated this, hated feeling so small, so useless. Her gaze flicked to the structure behind her, the glowing symbols shifting and pulsing. A thought struck her, wild and desperate. The Fangoraptors seemed to believe this place held power, and for some reason, it responded to her. If there was anything that could help, it was this. She pressed her hand against the surface again, the cool metal thrumming under her palm. "Please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Help us." The symbols flared, their light growing brighter until it bathed the clearing in a brilliant glow. The hum intensified, becoming a deep, resonant vibration that Emma felt in her bones. The Skrells hesitated, their movements faltering as they turned toward the structure. Calyx seized the moment, his voice sharp and commanding. Now! The pack launched their counterattack with renewed vigor, their claws and teeth tearing into the disoriented Skrells. The smaller wolf stayed close to Emma, its body tense and ready to strike. The glow from the structure began to coalesce, forming patterns that twisted and shifted like living fire. Emma felt a surge of warmth radiate through her, an energy that wasn't her own but seemed to flow through her all the same. The light pulsed outward in a wave, washing over the clearing. The Skrells recoiled, their screeches rising to a fever pitch as the light enveloped them. One by one, they began to retreat, their fluid forms melting back into the shadows of the forest. Emma collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving as the glow from the structure faded. The clearing was silent once more, save for the heavy breaths of the Fangoraptors and the faint rustle of the retreating Skrells. Calyx approached her, his massive form looming but no longer menacing. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, she thought she saw something beyond cold calculation. Respect, perhaps. You are more than you know, he said, his voice quieter now. Emma didn't respond. She was too exhausted, too overwhelmed to process what had just happened. But deep down, she knew this was far from over. The clearing was still, though the air crackled with a strange tension. Emma sat in the dirt, her breath shallow, her limbs trembling from exhaustion. The faint hum of the alien structure behind her had faded, but its glow lingered, pulsing softly as if catching its breath. Calyx stood motionless, his massive frame silhouetted against the eerie light. His glowing eyes scanned the forest's edge, ensuring the Skrells had truly retreated. Around him, the pack moved with mechanical precision, inspecting the fallen, checking their own wounds, and regrouping with an efficiency that made Emma's head spin. The smaller wolf remained close to her, its presence strangely comforting despite its jagged appearance. It didn't speak, but its watchful gaze told her enough. It was ready to act at a moment's notice. I don't understand, Emma murmured, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her own heartbeat. What just happened? Calyx turned toward her, his gaze heavy and unreadable. The relic awakened, he said simply. The words hung in the air, thick with meaning that Emma couldn't yet grasp. She looked up at the towering structure, its alien symbols twisting and shifting across its surface. It seemed alive, reacting to her in ways she couldn't explain. Why does it respond to me? She asked, her voice breaking. I don't know what it wants or what any of this means. Calyx's steps were slow and deliberate as he approached, his shadow falling over her. You carry the legacy of those who came before, he said. It is in your blood, your very essence. The machine knows this. It recognizes you as part of its design. Emma's mind raced, the pieces of this terrifying puzzle refusing to fit together. Her parents had told her stories of Earth, of humanity's desperate attempts to survive by colonizing distant worlds. But no one had ever mentioned leaving something like this behind, a relic that could summon light and power, that seemed to know her even though she didn't know herself. The smaller wolf finally spoke, its voice softer than Calyx's, but no less grave. The Skrells, they fear the relic, fear what it can do. That is why they hunt. Emma's stomach twisted. The Skrells weren't just mindless predators. They had a purpose. They had come for her. If they're scared of it, why don't they just destroy it? They cannot, Calyx said. The relic is bound to you now. Only through you can its true power be unleashed. The weight of his words pressed down on her, suffocating in its enormity. She was just a girl, a frightened, lonely child who had been snatched from her home. How could she possibly hold the key to something so monumental? Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced them back, her fists clenching in the dirt. I don't want this, she said, her voice trembling with anger. I didn't ask for any of it. Calyx's gaze didn't waver. The path does not wait for those unready to walk it, he said. What matters now is that you live. Without you, all is lost. Emma shook her head, the frustration boiling over. Why me? Why not someone stronger? Someone who knows what they're doing. The smaller wolf stepped closer, its metallic claws clicking softly against the ground. Because you are human, it said, its tone almost gentle. Your kind created this, created us. And now, you must choose, stand, or let it all fall. Before Emma could respond, a low growl rippled through the pack. Calyx's ears twitched, his head snapping toward the darkened forest. The Fangoraptors tensed as one, their bodies coiled like springs ready to unleash fury. They're coming back, Emma whispered, her voice tight with fear. Calyx growled, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. No, something worse. The words barely had time to settle before the forest erupted with motion. The shadows seemed to ripple, twisting and writhing as new shapes emerged. These creatures were larger than the Skrells, their forms more solid, but no less alien. Their bodies gleamed with a black, chitinous sheen, and their eyes burned with an intensity that made Emma's chest tighten. One stepped forward, its movements deliberate and predatory. Unlike the Skrells, it didn't rush blindly into the clearing. It stood at the edge, surveying the scene with a cold intelligence that sent a chill down Emma's spine. Calyx snarled, positioning himself between the creature and Emma. The smaller wolf followed suit, its stance low and protective. The pack moved as one, forming a defensive wall around her and the structure. The creature let out a sound, low and guttural, like the grinding of stones. It wasn't a screech or a growl, but something worse, a voice. Human, it said, the word dripping with disdain. Its glowing eyes locked onto Emma, and she felt as if she were being pulled apart under its gaze. You are an anomaly, a mistake. Emma's throat tightened, but she forced herself to stand. Her legs wobbled beneath her, but she refused to collapse again. I don't know what you want, she said, her voice shaking but defiant. But I'm not going anywhere. The creature tilted its head, its movements disturbingly fluid. You cannot stop what has begun. The relic will be silenced, and you with it. Calyx stepped forward, his voice a growl that resonated like thunder. You will not touch her. The creature laughed, a sound that grated against Emma's nerves. You are relics yourselves, tools left behind by dead masters. Do you think you can stand against us? Calyx didn't respond. Instead, he lunged, his massive body colliding with the creature in a blur of motion. The clearing erupted into chaos once more as the pack surged forward, their snarls and growls mixing with the screeches of the invaders. Emma backed toward the structure, her hands trembling as she pressed them against its surface. The glow returned, brighter this time, and she felt the energy coursing through her like a living thing. The battle raged around her, but she couldn't focus on it. The symbols on the structure shifted and pulsed, their meaning just out of reach. She closed her eyes, her mind racing. What do you want from me? A voice echoed in her thoughts, not Calyx's, not the wolves, but something older, deeper. Awaken. Her eyes snapped open, and the light from the structure surged, blinding in its intensity. The creatures recoiled, their screeches filling the air as the light consumed them. When the glow faded, the clearing was empty, save for the Fangoraptors and Emma. She sank to her knees, her body trembling, as Calyx approached. The battle is far from over, he said. But tonight you chose to fight. That is enough. Emma sat beneath the relic shadow, her back against its cool, metallic surface. The pulsating light had dimmed again, retreating into its enigmatic patterns. Around her, the Fangoraptors tended to their wounds, their movements efficient and wordless. The clearing was quiet now, but the silence felt brittle, as though the forest itself held its breath. Calyx loomed nearby, his towering form casting a long shadow. His glowing eyes, so alien and sharp, were fixed on her. He had not spoken since the battle ended, and the weight of his presence bore down on her like a question waiting to be answered. Emma rubbed her arms, her fingers tracing invisible lines across her skin as if trying to feel something solid, something real. You said this relic responds to me because of my blood, she said, breaking the uneasy quiet. But what does that even mean? Why me? Calyx tilted his head slightly, his ears twitching. You are the remnant of a dying lineage, he said, his voice steady and unyielding. The last fragment of humanity's creators. Those who shaped the stars, who built us to guard their legacy. Her breath caught, the enormity of his words slamming into her like a wave. Creators, she whispered. You mean humans built you? All of you? Yes, Calyx replied. But not as you know yourself now. The humans who created us were visionaries, wielders of knowledge so vast it shaped worlds. They forged us to stand as their shields, their swords, their protectors. When they fell, so did their empire. Emma's thoughts churned, 1,000 questions colliding in her mind. Her parents had spoken of Earth and the colonies, of humanity's desperate efforts to survive. But none of their stories had hinted at this, at a forgotten empire and its loyal creations. The smaller wolf, now seated close enough to brush against her side, added, You are not just human. You are a spark of what they once were. The relic senses it, and it has chosen you. Emma swallowed hard, her throat dry. She didn't feel like a spark of anything. She felt small, fragile, and utterly out of her depth. Chosen me for what? Calyx's gaze didn't waver. To finish what they could not. To awaken the relic's full power and drive back the darkness that hunts it. The Skrells, the greater enemies, they are not here by chance. They are drawn to this place, to what it represents. They seek to extinguish the last light of what your kind left behind. Emma shook her head, her voice rising. But I'm not them. I'm not some ancient hero or brilliant creator. I'm just a girl who got taken from her home. Calyx stepped closer, his immense frame towering over her, but there was no menace in his posture. And yet you stand, he said. Despite your fear, despite your doubt, you have not turned away. That is enough to begin. She looked up at him, tears burning in her eyes. What if I fail? The smaller wolf nudged her gently, its metallic fur cool against her skin. Then we fall with you, it said simply. The weight of their faith in her pressed against Emma's chest. These creatures, so strange and fearsome, were putting their lives on the line for her. A girl who barely understood why she was here. The thought was both humbling and terrifying. Before she could respond, a faint sound reached her ears, carried on the breeze. It was a low, rhythmic hum, growing louder with each passing moment. The Fangoraptors tensed as one, their heads snapping toward the horizon. Calyx growled, a sound that rumbled like distant thunder. They return, he said. Emma's pulse quickened, her hands curling into fists. The Skrells? Calyx shook his head. No, something greater. The air seemed to vibrate, a deep resonance that settled into Emma's bones. The light from the relic flickered, its patterns shifting erratically. Whatever was coming, it wasn't just another battle. It was something worse. The Fangoraptors moved into formation, their movements synchronized and precise. Calyx barked commands in their guttural language, and the pack responded instantly, their claws digging into the earth as they prepared to face whatever approached. Emma's heart pounded as she looked out over the darkened forest. Shadows moved among the trees, growing larger and more distinct with each passing second. She could feel the weight of their presence, a suffocating dread that pressed against her chest. What do we do? She asked, her voice trembling. Calyx turned to her, his gaze steady. You will stay by the relic, he said. Its power is tied to you. Protecting it means protecting you. Emma's stomach churned. But I don't know how to use it. What if it doesn't respond this time? Calyx's voice was firm. It will. The shadows reached the edge of the clearing, resolving into forms that made Emma's blood run cold. They were taller than the Skrells, their bodies covered in jagged, obsidian armor that seemed to drink in the light. Their eyes burned like molten fire, and their movements were deliberate and menacing. One of them stepped forward, its gaze locking onto Emma. Child of dust, it said, its voice a deep, resonant growl. You should not be here. Emma's legs felt like jelly, but she forced herself to stand, her back pressed against the relic. I didn't choose this, she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "But I'm here now." The creature tilted its head, a motion that was almost curious. "Then you will die here," it said. Calyx let out a deafening roar, his voice echoing across the clearing. "Not while we stand." The battle erupted with a ferocity that stole Emma's breath. The Fangoraptors launched themselves at the invaders, their claws and teeth flashing in the dim light. The air filled with the sounds of snarls, screeches, and the clash of metal on flesh. Emma pressed her hands against the relic, her mind racing. The symbols beneath her palms shifted and pulsed, but their meaning remained elusive. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she whispered. "If you can hear me, help us." The relic responded with a sudden surge of light, its glow piercing the darkness. The warmth she had felt before returned, stronger this time, filling her with a strange sense of purpose. She opened her eyes, and the battle came into sharp focus. The Fangoraptors were holding their ground, but barely. The invaders were relentless, their obsidian forms cutting through the pack like a blade through water. Emma felt the energy of the relic coursing through her, a power that was not her own, but seemed to resonate with something deep inside her. She didn't understand it, but she didn't need to. "Enough," she whispered, her voice steady. The light from the relic surged outward, a blinding wave that swept across the clearing. The invaders recoiled, their screeches rising in unison as the light consumed them. When the glow faded, the clearing was still. The invaders were gone, their forms dissolved into ash. The Fangoraptors stood in silence, their bodies battered but unbroken. Calyx approached Emma, his gaze softer than before. "You are stronger than you know," he said. Emma sank to the ground, her chest heaving. She didn't feel strong. She felt like a girl who had just barely survived. But deep down, she knew Calyx was right. The battle wasn't over, but she had taken the first step, and for now that was enough. The air was heavy with the scent of scorched earth and ozone. Emma stood in the clearing, her knees weak, but her gaze unwavering. The relic's light had faded to a faint glow, its surface calm once more, as if resting after the surge of power that had saved them. Around her, the Fangoraptors moved cautiously, their sleek forms battered but unyielding. Calyx stood closest, his eyes scanning the perimeter for any remaining threats. "What happens now?" Emma asked, her voice quiet but steady. Calyx turned to her, his gaze piercing. "Now, the enemy will regroup. They will not stop until they extinguish the relic's light." Emma's chest tightened. She had felt the weight of responsibility before, but now it loomed like a shadow over her. She wasn't just a girl who had survived by chance. She was the center of this fight, the thread on which everything seemed to hang. "Why can't they just leave it alone?" she asked, frustration and fear threading her words. "Why does it matter so much to them?" The smaller wolf, now nursing a wound on its side, answered in a low voice. "The relic is more than a symbol. It is a gateway, a connection to the Creator's knowledge and power. If it awakens fully, it could reshape the balance of this world." The Skrells and their masters fear that possibility. Emma shivered, her hand unconsciously reaching for the relic behind her. She didn't feel powerful. If anything, she felt like a brittle shell, barely holding together under the weight of forces she couldn't comprehend. Calyx took a step closer, his massive form imposing but strangely comforting. "They fear the unknown," he said. "But you are no longer unknown. They have seen your strength, and now they will bring their full might to crush it." Emma swallowed hard, her mind racing. "Then what do we do? We can't just wait for them to come back stronger." Calyx's expression was grim. "We do not wait. We prepare. The relic is a beacon now, drawing both allies and enemies. There are others out there, those who once served the Creators as we do. We must find them before the Skrells do." Emma blinked, the idea sparking a glimmer of hope. "There are more like you?" "Not exactly," the smaller wolf said with a faint growl. "Each creation was unique, designed for a specific purpose. Some were guardians, others seekers, builders, or destroyers. If they still exist, they may hold pieces of the knowledge you need." The enormity of the task was staggering, but Emma forced herself to focus. For the first time, she felt a flicker of determination, a spark of something stronger than fear. "Then we find them," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. "We find them before it's too late." Calyx nodded, his approval subtle but palpable. "It will not be easy. The journey will take us beyond the safety of this place, into lands ruled by darkness and danger." Emma glanced at the relic, its faint glow casting long shadows across the ground. "Safety doesn't seem like an option anymore," she said quietly. The smaller wolf let out a low chuckle. "You learn quickly." As the pack began to regroup, Calyx gave a series of sharp commands in their guttural language. The Fangoraptors moved with purpose, tending to the wounded and preparing for what lay ahead. Emma watched them, their fluidity and discipline both alien and mesmerizing. A sudden rustle in the underbrush made her flinch, and she turned sharply toward the sound. Calyx and the others were immediately on alert, their bodies tensing as they formed a protective circle around her. A figure emerged from the shadows, a humanoid form, draped in tattered, iridescent fabric that shimmered like oil on water. Its features were obscured by a hood, but its presence was undeniable. Calyx growled, his stance lowering into one of aggression. "Who are you?" The figure raised a hand, its voice resonating with an ethereal cadence. "Peace, Calyx of the Fangoraptors. I mean no harm." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. The stranger's voice was calm, almost soothing, but there was an undercurrent of power that made her uneasy. "Then state your purpose," Calyx demanded, his growl deepening. The figure turned its hooded gaze to Emma, and she felt as though it was looking straight through her. "I am a seeker," it said, "one who has watched from the shadows, waiting for this moment." Emma's breath caught. "What moment?" "The moment the light returned," the seeker said, gesturing toward the relic. "You have awakened something long thought lost. Now, the echoes of the past stir, and the threads of fate begin to weave anew." Calyx stepped forward, his massive frame a wall of protection between Emma and the stranger. "If you are truly a seeker, you will understand that trust must be earned." The figure nodded slowly. "Of course, but time is not on your side. The Skrell's masters will not hesitate to send their strongest to claim what you have awakened. You will need allies and guidance." Emma took a step forward, her fear tempered by curiosity. "Do you know where to find them? The others like Calyx?" The seeker inclined its head. "I know of places where the echoes are strongest, places where the old guardians may still slumber. But reaching them will be perilous." Emma's stomach churned, but she forced herself to stand tall. "Then tell us where to go." Calyx glanced back at her, his expression unreadable. "Are you certain?" She nodded, her voice steady. "We can't stay here. If there's a chance we can find more allies, more answers, we have to take it." The seeker extended a hand, and a small, shimmering orb appeared in its palm. It pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, its glow faintly resembling the relic's. "This will guide you," the seeker said, offering it to Emma. "Follow its light, and it will lead you to the first echo." Emma hesitated before reaching out, her fingers brushing against the orb. It was warm to the touch, and as she held it, a faint sense of direction filled her mind, a pull toward something distant and unseen. The seeker stepped back, its form beginning to blur at the edges. "The path ahead will test you in ways you cannot yet imagine. But if you hold to your resolve, you may yet succeed." Before Emma could respond, the figure faded into the shadows, leaving only the faint scent of rain in its wake. Calyx turned to her, his gaze sharp. "The path is chosen, then?" Emma nodded, her grip tightening around the orb. "We move forward," she said, her voice carrying a quiet determination. As the pack began their preparations, Emma stood by the relic one last time, its faint glow a reminder of all that was at stake. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time, she felt the stirrings of hope. The journey was just beginning,